Hello, true creatives, and welcome to a very special episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and it's not often that I get to introduce someone that I'm actually a really big fan of myself. Today we've got with us Eric Barker. He is a award-winning, best-selling author of Barking Up the Wrong Tree, and now his upcoming book plays well with others. He is also well known for having one of the most popular newsletters, I think, on the internet as far as science-based insights onto improving your own performance, and a very popular blog that goes with it. Eric, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I'm glad we finally made it happen. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Eric, for the few people who haven't heard of you and the work that you do, you probably didn't start out being a professional blogger. So, can you let us know a bit about your journey, where you got started, and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey in the United States. I studied philosophy undergrad, so I was always somebody who was kind of asking big questions. And I actually worked as a screenwriter in Hollywood for about a decade, and then I was introduced to social science, and it really clicked with me because the big philosophical questions that I'd always been curious about, rather than kind of some navel gazing or blue sky, you're starting to get results. And so I started my blog. It, caught on, and just trying to look at the science, trying to get some solid answers on how we can be better at life. And that led to my first book, which was, testing the maxims of success we grew up with. And the new book, Plays Well with Others, is all about testing the maxims scientifically of all the relationship advice that we were given.
And it's this scientific advice and the maxims behind us that really made me really gravitate towards your work, especially the newsletters that you send out very regularly. What I really like about those is they always have a solid research behind them, but you're not afraid to use humor in there as well. And it's very different to a lot of people, myself included, who are maybe a bit more dry about just getting the facts across. What made you sort of evolve towards this style of a mixture between the serious and the not so serious?
I mean, my background, was in entertainment, working in Hollywood, and it was funny because I initially felt like, okay, I need to take this very seriously, and I did, and it was just frankly me becoming more me. I still believe that we need solid advice from either research or from top experts in their field. But if people just wanted the dry research, well, there's plenty of research papers online. There's plenty they could just go look at the primary sources themselves. But obviously, people don't want to do that. So, for me to just make it entertaining, to make it fun, to use analogies or humor to just make it more accessible to people. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, has a great quote where he says basically it's like the answers are already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think to make things more accessible to people, that's always been my goal. A lot of people write to me and they're like, Dr. Barker or Professor Barker, and I'm like, I am not a doctor. And I see myself in a lot of ways as kind of the filter, the translator, and making it accessible and entertaining.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I enjoy it so much. I enjoy your crackerjack time at the end of every newsletter as well, which are often completely random, but always bring a smile to my face. So let's take it to your first book. Obviously, you'd been writing the blog for quite a while, and then you release Barking Up the Wrong Tree. What's the ethos of that book? You say it's sort of pushing people against some of the maxims they maybe grew up with. What are a couple of examples?
So basically, we all get this advice growing up, these maxims, and the book was focused on success, not just career success, but also life success. And we hear that nice guys finish last. We hear that it's not what you know, it's who you know. To always be confident. And we all have seen at times when this is true, when it's not true, and we started to wonder. I started to wonder about this. Certainly, I was going through a difficult transition in my life. I started to wonder, like, is this real? And so, kind of going down the rabbit hole and looking at the thing, and what for example, what I found really interesting was the whole maxim of nice guys finish last, and it's like we've all seen people who get exploited, get taken advantage of. But on the other hand, we also all know some people who are pretty successful, have done well for themselves, that are really nice and friendly. So it doesn't seem to immediately, intuitively always hold water. And the funny thing is, when you look at the research, what you see is that that's actually the case, is that the results are bimodal, is that basically the people who do the worst and the people who do the best are the nicest people. Is that at the very bottom of success metrics, you see people who are very nice because they do get exploited, they do get taken advantage of. But also at the top of success metrics, we all know people who are very friendly, who are very positive, who people feel the need to do good for and help. So it's less about like, oh, nice guys finish last, don't be nice. It's more about being nice, but finding a way to protect yourself, so that you don't get taken advantage of.
I think I saw Adam Grant talking about some similar research.
Absolutely, and that's where a lot of the research I drew on came from, was Adam Grant's work.
I also like the psychological aspect that you talk about. Not psychological in the sense of I'm reading some crime thriller, but the psychology about what it takes to be comfortable in your own skin, to overcome anxiety, to lead healthy relationships. And I think that's then coming more towards your upcoming book, Plays Well with Others, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that's because it was really interesting. Freud, said like kind of the two big areas of life are, work and relationships. And, I drew on that and mentioned it that my first book was more focused on career and my second book is more focused on relationships. And it's really interesting too, in the sense that we all want to be happier. We all want to live better lives. And oftentimes we take the wrong focus. We think about, what do I need to do? What do I need to get? And Brett Ford, who teaches UC Berkeley, says that that's kind of the wrong lens that we put on things, because we need to be thinking about relationships, simply because so much of our happiness comes from relationships, that if you're just focused on me, you're kind of doing it wrong. You need to be thinking in a more networked community type way, because it's not going to be all about you. It's going to be about how you fit into something greater.
And when you're talking about relationships, what are you talking about? Just intimate, romantic relationships, or what is what was the scope here?
That's something I always go out of my way to clarify. Even when I'm talking about the book, is that I'm talking about all kinds, not just love. The book is split into four sections. The first tests the maxim of can you judge a book by its cover? So it's about understanding people, reading people, both what they're thinking, what they're feeling. Can we be Sherlock Holmes, or what does it take to connect with people better? The second is, a friend in need is a friend indeed. It's like, is that true? What does it take to build friendships and to deal with toxic people? Third section is, does love conquer all? And it is about, romantic relationships, marriage, love. In the fourth chapter, I get into is no man an island? So we talk about issues of loneliness, especially pandemic, post-pandemic, and issues of community. Something that I think many people have been noticing. In the 21st century, we're kind of lacking.
I think definitely. Let's, if you don't mind, let's start there, because as you said, the pandemic has really brought to light this feeling of isolation for a lot of people. With it being forced on some people, but maybe bringing to light the similar feelings that other people have been struggling with for decades.
Absolutely. What was most interesting to me, like shocking to me, in terms of looking at the loneliness research. First of all, loneliness is correlated with like every negative health metric under the sun, which is terrifying when you're home alone writing a book to be reading about how being alone is really terrible for you. That's that. I just wanted to like throw my laptop away and go hug friends. But the interesting thing, though, was that Faye Alberti, who teaches at the University of York, she's a historian, she said that basically before the 19th century, loneliness, both in terms of being mentioned, but also as an experience, basically didn't exist. And I read this and I was stunned. I was like, how could that be possible? And she goes through all so much of literature, and you see the word lonely is used, but it didn't have the negative connotation. It meant isolated, but it didn't necessarily have the negative valence. And what she got into was the issue of before, we always felt like we were part of something, the feeling of community. And this actually aligns with the research, because John Cacioppo is the leading researcher in terms of loneliness, basically did a study and found that lonely people don't spend any less time with other people than non-lonely people, which, again, kind of stunning.
That's very surprising, yeah.
But the issue here is we've all felt lonely in a crowd. So apparently, being proximate to people, I mean, hey, face-to-face time is fantastic, but being proximate to people is not the obvious solution. You can feel lonely around people. And what it comes down to is loneliness is a subjective experience. Loneliness is not necessarily about being apart from others. Loneliness is about how you feel about your relationships. And so if you feel like you are a part of something, that people care about you, that people are out there, you can be away from people and still feel connection. And before the 19th century, we were much more tied together by religion, by nation, by community, by tribe, by some feeling of a team connection was always there. It was in the 19th century that we had the rise of individualism, and so many other isms, the capitalism, existentialism, all, found their roots and then exploded in the 20th century. And so the issue becomes we try and fix loneliness by saying spend more time with other people. That can help. But fundamentally, loneliness is about your feeling of how good your relationships are, how connected you are to other people. And so we need that feeling that comes from community, comes from being connected to others. And what's interesting is people did certainly spend time alone in the past, but that was solitude. And solitude can be a very positive thing. It's linked with creativity. So many creatives, from Kafka to Dostoevsky, Picasso. Newton came up with so many of his theories while he was isolated in Woolthorpe. It's like solitude can be fantastic. In fact, Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, said that solitude is actually protective against many of the negatives of loneliness. So solitude and loneliness are both when you're by yourself. But solitude is the good version. Loneliness is the negative version. What's the difference? Your subjective perception. How do you feel about your relationships? If you feel like you're connected to others, you can be alone and be fine at times. If you feel like you're not connected to others, being isolated can make that even worse.
That's absolutely fascinating, because obviously when you always look at research like this, you, as any good scientist, should think, is this nurture or is this nature? I doubt that over the last 200 years there's been too much of a change to our genome or the physical aspects of being human. So what's been changing in society to make us feel more lonely when we didn't feel it before? And if I can ask, is there any research which suggests if this is more people are more prone recently in the last couple of decades compared to the start of the 19th century, or was this an explosion that came with individualism that all of a sudden everyone was feeling lonely?
I mean, it certainly started with a lot of these concepts, and I don't mean to paint the modern world as necessarily a negative place. I in some ways, in the book, I analogize it in some ways to nuclear energy. It's like you break those bonds, and it can produce tremendous, powerful energy. It can also destroy things and leave lasting radiation. It's about, the balance there. Excuse me. And the issue for us is that, by lifting the individual, it's been fantastic in terms of, we've grown economies, we've given people more freedom, more options, more possibilities. But on the other hand, we need those connections to a degree as well. We need to find a better balance because we've been making it all about the individual, and we need community. We need to feel connected to others. And I talk a little bit about, social media, in there, where the issues with this go back to probably the 1940s, 1950s. There was the initial research on parasocial relationships, where it's not actually another person you're face-to-face connected to. It's this idea of a person, and that started with television. And you can see Robert Putnam, a researcher at Harvard, looked at the death of community in the 20th century. I mean, everything from clubs, groups, bowling leagues, Boy Scouts, everything kind of declined, and so much of that was attributable to television, which was kind of this substitute replacement for our social lives. Now, in the 21st century, television has been largely surpassed by social media, another kind of social, replacement, a parasocial relationship. And again, I don't mean to be one of those people who's demonizing Instagram and Facebook. If we use those services, those platforms, to connect with others and then to meet up face to face, they're fantastic. If we do it to stay in touch with people we're far away from, that's great. But many of us are using it as a replacement. And if we spend too much time on those platforms, we only have a certain social budget of time. And if more of that is getting shifted to online as opposed to face, then now you have a substitute, whether you like it or not.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess there's a whole chapter dedicated to it in your book, so I'm not going to ask you to spill all the secrets. But if someone is feeling this sense of loneliness, it sounds like there's part of the solution is around someone's perception of what's happening to them, and part of it is actually the actions you can take to build these bonds again. Is that the case?
Yeah, obviously, more face-to-face time is great, which has been super hard during the pandemic. But so many of these trends were already taking place, long before the pandemic happened. We need to feel like we're a part of something. What's really interesting is, there's tons of research showing that, an improved social life was the happiness equivalent of an extra $131,000 a year. Yeah, try and ask your boss for a $131,000 raise and see how that goes over. It's really powerful, but what was even more interesting to me is that while adding friends certainly is a positive, five friends of yours who don't know one another is not as happiness boosting as having five friends who do know one another. So again, there's this synergy in community. You can add five more friends, but if they're disparate, that's great, but it's like a hub and spoke kind of arrangement versus five friends who know each other, who all talk to one another, who are all looking out for you, who can coordinate, who can say, hey, Eric's having problems. What should we do? It leads to more support, more happiness. We often think about, very, very much one-on-one, but it's that part of a community. So if you can reach out, become part of a group, form a group, religion, society, community, it's like reaching out, being part of, your local network. It's part of feeling like somebody else is there. That involves the face-to-face, but it's more about kind of deepening those relationships. And like I said, taking those friends maybe you already have, connecting them so that it's less of one-on-one, 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 and it's more of, a circle, a group. That adds the perception that I'm a part of something.
It sounds like you're going towards the other research in your chapter around a friend in need is a friend indeed. How do you find out who your real friends are, or which friends have the most beneficial aspects to your well-being?
It's a great question. And that gets into, because my first step for looking at friendship was looking at the work of Dale Carnegie, which book has sold a zillion copies, and what's really interesting is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, by far the most well-known book on making friends. You know, social science over the past century, has basically supported and reinforced most of what he said. He got one thing wrong. He said to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to try and see things from their perception. And work by Nicholas Epley at University of Chicago says we're basically terrible at that. Basically, in general, we can only perceive what other people are thinking and feeling accurately like 20% of the time. But that said, most of what Dale Carnegie said was very accurate. Here's the thing, though. Carnegie's work is very effective for the beginning of relationships, for getting to know someone, for that initial steps. But that's also why a lot of manipulative people have used Carnegie's stuff. It's very easy, which is why we like it. Low investment, so it's simple. But again, those signals are easy to fake. So to your point, there's more that we need in order to learn how to deepen friendships. And like you said, to figure out who our real friends are. And what that comes down to is the economic concept of costly signals. What signals can someone send to you that they're a true friend that aren't easy? That's when you know, oh, wow, this is something that matters. And in the book, I talk about the two fundamental ones, which are time and vulnerability. Time is a costly signal simply because it's scarce. As I say in the book, if I give you an hour of my time every day, I can only do that for 24 people. End of story, no discussion. It's scarce. I can only do that for so many people. I do need to sleep occasionally. So I can only do that. That's scarce, that's costly. And research shows the thing that friends argue over the most is time. So time is a costly signal. Somebody giving you their time shows that this person cares more about you. The second is vulnerability, where basically we've all tried to make a friend and we hit a point where the conversation kind of goes in circles and you kind of can't break through. And it's that issue of when we first meet people, we usually try to impress them. We usually try to look, cool, powerful, smart, high status. And while that can be useful, certainly in terms of like leadership or sales, in terms of personal friendships, it's vulnerability that really makes the difference. Because the best way, and perhaps the only way to really show trust, is to give someone else your trust. If you tell someone something that they potentially could use against you, that could make you look bad, that's saying, I trust you. That's saying, this is a safe place here. I'm going to give, and often people will reciprocate. And the more they're willing to reciprocate, the more they trust you. If somebody would never tell you any of their problems, any of their issues, any of their weaknesses, yeah, you're not going to get very far. But you're also not going to feel very comfortable. You're not going to feel very human. You're not going to feel like you can share your problems, your negatives. And if you can't share your problems, how much of a friend is someone? So in terms of the litmus test for figuring out who your real friends are, time and vulnerability are really powerful.
I remember many experiences from my own youth where you've got very close guy friends, and the way you spend time together is quite often, if other people were to perceive you, there's not much talking happening. You might even just go to see a movie together. But in that case, time together, even though you're not actively engaging, is still bonding. And then you have other relationships where a lot can grow in a very short amount of time if you are open.
That's funny. That's exactly what the research shows. Jeff Hall did research showing how long it takes to move from acquaintance to friend to best friend, and enormous amount of time. Tens, hundreds of hours. But Arthur Aaron, who's a researcher at Stony Brook University, showed that you can actually make two people feel like best friends, like they've been friends all their lives, in 45 minutes. And what that comes down to is vulnerability, is, people opening up, people talking about their fears, their concerns, their weaknesses. It actually helps people to grow closer. You can relate. Everybody's always talking about their strengths. To know someone's weaknesses, that's what really opens up. And more to your point, you see there's a big sex difference in terms of it. Men are not very good at friendship. They're really not, and it's tough. If you look at the data, basically, men tend to lose friends over time. Men tend to pass away. If their wife passes away, they tend to pass away naturally because usually their wife is often the center of their social life, their social network. Women are usually much better about maintaining, their friendships, but just opening up a little bit, talking about things. As I say in the book, I call it the scary rule. I say, if it's scary, say it. Now, granted, you can be incremental. You should be incremental. Don't confess to any murders. It's just start small, see if the person reciprocates. If they do, escalate. That's how we build deeper friendships. And I think for guys it can be trickier to open up about weaknesses. We just need to take it slow.
So let's move back to the beginning of your book, your first chapter around not judging a book by its cover. What sort of insights can we learn from the research you found there?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. Basically, the Sherlock Holmes style passive reading of people is, basically not going to happen. Like I mentioned, Nicholas Epley's research. We accurately perceive strangers' thoughts and feelings 20% of the time. With friends, that goes up to 30%. With spouses, it goes up to 35%. So basically, even if you're talking to your spouse or partner, 2/3 of the time, what you think is going on in their head is wrong. And there seems to be a fairly fairly low ceiling on how good we can get at this in terms of passively reading people. But that doesn't mean that we're just screwed. What it means is that if you want to be able to read people better, it's less about your reading ability and more about making them more readable. It's more about, getting them to send stronger signals that you can read. And there's many ways, we can do this. First and foremost is context. If you're just sitting there having a cup of coffee, you're not sending strong signals. But if we were to, play a sport together, I could see how you make decisions. I could see whether you cheat or not. I can see, how you behave when there's stakes. And that's really critical. Another critical thing that we can use to make our skills for reading people a little bit better is to be motivated, is basically to try. We usually don't. Our brains kind of idle along. But what repeated studies have shown is if there's something to gain, there's something to lose, all of a sudden we sharpen up and we get a little bit better. People on first dates read people better than those in typical average day-to-day situations. Why? There's something on the line. So by motivating ourselves, by meeting people and dealing with people in contexts where they're giving us more information, beyond that, adding other people to the mix can help. If you only dealt with a person when they were in the presence of their boss, would you feel like you were seeing the whole them? It's like, no, they're going to be filtering. Another big insight that I think a lot of people might find surprising is that just body language, or at least the deliberate attempt to read body language, is almost useless. Like, we do pick up things, no doubt, but deliberately attempting, there is no body language Rosetta Stone, and there never will be. We never know. If I'm shivering, you don't know if I'm scared or I'm cold. And it's really hard to read body language if we don't have a baseline. Maybe you always drum your fingers, or maybe you only drum your fingers when you're bored. I don't know, because I don't know you well enough to know those tells. But what we can use to get better is that basically, rather than focusing so much on trying to read somebody's body language, by focusing on their voice. Because the issue is, when we can hear someone, but we can't see them, empathic accuracy only drops off 4%. But when we can see someone, we can't hear them, empathic accuracy drops off 54%. So it's really the voice that is going to tell us a lot more about what this person's thinking, what they're feeling, than the body language that some people really get excited about.
One of the reasons why I'm very keen to speak with you about this whole issue of reading people and finding out what they're thinking is when teams are working together, and especially in slightly, let's call them dangerous situations, where people are creative and developing new ideas, if you don't have this concept of psychological safety, then all of a sudden a lot of people's guards can go up, and the end result is that people try and cover their own ass, and as a result, only the most sort of bottom rung, try and please everyone, designed by committee ideas get through. So have you found anything that helps teams overcome these barriers towards feeling comfortable being open or vulnerable or developing this idea of psychological safety?
I mean, this is definitely a relevant issue in the area of creativity because, first off, in terms of the human brain, all the creativity research shows that creativity is much more associated with being relaxed. So many people have creative ideas in the shower. When you look at people who are given stimulants like caffeine or amphetamines, or it typically has a narrowing effect. By increasing focus, that spotlight effect. By increasing focus and drive, that's a very powerful, but it doesn't produce that breadth that comes up with creative new ideas.
It's very good for the convergent part of thinking, but not good for the divergent generation phase.
You want to be careful about when you have your caffeine. And so feeling relaxed and safe, is a big part of it. And, another thing is that people often think creativity in groups is always very light and friendly. There's sometimes a little bit of conflict involved. Most of the research on brainstorming shows that it really doesn't work just throwing out ideas, in a group setting because of many of the dynamics that you're talking about. People come up with group creativity happens more often when people in advance come up with ideas, put them together, everybody does that, and then everybody brings their ideas together versus trying to come up with new ideas in the meeting. That's where what you're talking about happens, where people get scared. Am I going to look stupid? Am I this? You get more original, you get less groupthink. But, in terms of what we're talking about, having an environment where people feel safe, they don't feel like they're going to get bullied or called stupid, where it's acceptable to throw out ideas. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. That's going to allow for the relaxation, the safety to, hey, what about this? Maybe it's stupid, but that's fine as long as it's acceptable. If people feel like there's a high penalty for being wrong, then you're going to get silence, and like you said, you're going to get these limited, neutered ideas. I think the best example of that is if there's an episode from many years ago of the radio show podcast This American Life, where they went behind the scenes at The Onion, the satirical online newspaper, and you just saw them go through tons and tons of headline ideas. And just the fact that everybody felt safe in that room, even if they teased each other, they all knew each other, they all knew nobody was out to get you. And the number that they went through was just crazy, but everybody felt safe, everybody felt relaxed, and they generated so many ideas. So even if only 2-3% were good, it didn't matter because you had so many submissions that in the end you ended up with really great stuff.
I did an interview with Professor Dean Keith Simonton a while back, and he's the researcher who looked at
he's the expert.
And he discovered the equal odds rule, where even the most respected geniuses came to their body of work of amazing works and ideas by also producing a even larger body of work of really crap ideas. So you need to just accept the fact that in some cases it is a numbers game, and you need to have an environment and a culture where that's allowed.
And your latter point is well taken. I mean, he's done amazing research, and you just see it across the board, is that the people who produce the best ideas are the people who produce the most ideas. Certainly there are other factors, but it's no mistake that and this isn't speculation or assumption, or this is, he looked at the people who submitted the most patent applications are the people who had, the best thing. They were just doing more work. And by the same token, for groups, yes, if you create an environment where people feel like it's safe to say silly things, you're going to get a higher volume. And as he's seen, ceteris paribus, A higher volume of ideas means in the end, you end up with the best ideas.
So let's take it down to the last step, the relationship aspect of romantic relationships you mentioned in your book. There's one aspect that is again tied to innovation and creativity that I'd like to touch on, which is as people grow older in their relationships, sometimes there is a trend to leave the past behind of what you used to do when you were younger, and that might be hobbies, it might be activities that you felt passionate about, and to try and do things together, whereas some groups grow apart and they want to do more things individually. Is there any research which shows what keeps a strong relationship together if people still want to have their own time and their own individual hobbies and activities? Is that still possible?
Oh, I mean, it's definitely still possible, but it's as you're pointing to, you do see a decline in, everything from productivity to outside relationships like friendships, and so many things. Actually, you even see research on the decline in crime. People don't have time for all kinds of things after that, and that's what it's a big function of, is time. And I think that it's really important. That basically we understand the distinction between, you hear the term quality time, sort of a cliche thrown around, but it really does make a difference. You can have, these days we're all so busy, and that's a problem in itself, kind of limiting what you're doing, what you're interested in. But just spending time together as a couple, with your partner, in and of itself, I mean, I guess it's a positive. It certainly, ceteris paribus, it's a positive, but that's not what produces the best relationships. There's probably the key research on this. They had couples do things together. They had two sets of couples. One had date night that was pleasant. The other had date night that was exciting. They did cool stuff. They went to concerts. They went on roller coasters. They did horseback riding. And what you saw was a tremendous difference. Pleasant, lost, exciting things with your partner. Because there's this concept, in psychology of emotional contagion that, much like Pavlov, it's like we associate the feelings that we're feeling in an environment, we associate with the people that are around us. So if we do exciting things, that makes you feel good about your partner. You associate that positive with them. So if we do things that are exciting, that are engaging, that make us feel good about our partner, then we don't have to be as concerned about, I need to spend every bit of time with my partner or I'm neglecting them. It's like you can focus on the quality time, but it's not just, what does that mean? I think most people don't know what that means. Well, a clue to that is those exciting things, those dynamic things. When people first start dating, they do all kinds of exciting, fun stuff. And they think, that's, we were in love, so we did exciting things. Actually, very often it's the reverse. You did exciting things, and that's what made you fall in love. So never stop dating. Keep doing exciting things, and you can keep the bond strong with your partner, and you don't have to spend, necessarily endless hours that aren't adding much to the relationship, that do take away from other interests, other possibilities, other friendships. So I think if people focus more on improving the excitement and improving the quality, the true quality time of their relationships, then they don't have to miss out on quite as much when they settle down.
I'm sure it's also possible as you get older, and if you choose to have children or stay in a relationship without children, you can express your creativity in other ways than you may have previously thought about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just having, again, the relaxation, the warmth, being with kids. Kids ask questions that nobody else asks, and that is the path to creativity. And kids put you in situations where you have to be creative. They're fighting monsters. Do you fight monsters on your own? No. So it can be very creative. It can add a lot to it. It's the tricky part for many of us is that balance, because all these things have positives. We just need to find a way to fit them into our lives appropriately.
Eric, I've really, really enjoyed our discussion today. I know your book's coming out after the launch of this podcast quite soon. So if people do manage to pre-order it before it comes out, they get some sort of pleasant bonuses for doing that, don't they?
Yeah, if anybody orders the book, pre-orders it before it comes out, basically, for me, I literally closed the deal on this book 2 weeks before the pandemic, lockdown started, at least in California where I live, and so I'd already decided to write the book, but all of a sudden this took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to write a book on science of relationships. It was like, okay, people are going to need this. Like, I felt like, okay, I have an obligation. So I wrote a lot more, and, publishers give you a word limit. So I have a whole, literally, if you pre-order the book, you get 25% more book. There was a whole other section. I addressed the old maxim of just be yourself. Is that true? Is it not? And that couldn't be included in the published book because, like I said, I only had 70,000 words. So if people pre-order the book, they get the analysis, discussion, and answer to, should we be ourselves? How do we best be ourselves? And how do we be our best self? So it's a little addition if people pre-order.
And of course, if you're listening to this after the book's already been launched, it sounds like an absolutely amazing read. I recommend you go out and get it as well. You can't go wrong also subscribing to Eric's newsletter. If people want to find out more about your blog and your newsletter and anywhere else they can find you online, what's the best place they can go to find out?
Yeah, the URL for my blog can be a little tricky for some people. It's a Japanese word that most people mispronounce. So if you go to ericbarker.org, ericbarker.org, it will redirect you to the site. And signing up for my newsletter is the best way to stay up to date with the latest, find things I'm finding from science that can improve your life.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get those links down in the description below. Eric, it's been really wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they are backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.